Mayor, we are still one member outstanding. We have attempted to ring them and we've had no answer on their number. We'll continue to try and bring them into the meeting, but if you want to progress, that's acceptable.
Right, I will do as long as, yes, just try and contact them. Okay, thank you. Right, good evening everybody again. Welcome to this virtual meeting of the council, and I'll start with some of the domestic arrangements for the council. Mobile devices. Please ensure that all electrical equipment is either on silent mode or switched off to minimise any interruptions. Members are reminded that if you wish to speak, please raise your hand mobile thing on your. I'm telling you in a minute, what's it called? Your device. There you go. Please can I remind members dialing in from home to ensure that they cannot be heard by anybody else due to the sensitive nature of the meeting. Voting will be undertaken by roll call. The monitoring officer will call out the members' names alphabetically. If any members are dialing into the meeting using a telephone, please can they remember to dial *6 when they wish to unmute during a vote, for instance. The meeting is being live streamed during the open session for members of the public to watch. Public contributions were requested to be received in writing 2 working days prior to the meeting. Okay then, on to item 1. Have we got any apologies for absence? Are there any apologies for absence?
None received.
Right, thank you, Mr. Hall. Item 2, declarations of interest. Have we got any declarations of interest? Mr. Hall?
I'll pick that one up, Madam Mayor. Right, there have been declarations of interest. Councillor Yates has indicated an interest in agenda item 11, and queries have been raised with me concerning agenda 10, whether that would trigger any interest with members, and I have indicated it would not.
Right, thank you. Right, item 3, minutes of the last council meeting on the 25th of November. Now, there is a suggested amendment to the minutes to clarify that Councillor Cliff Hughes experienced some technical issues which meant he couldn't vote on any of the items. Now, do we want to take that any further, or is that something we're going to leave?
Apologies, Mayor. 2 members indicated a desire to speak on the members' interest item. Councillor Wharton Hardman.
Yeah, apologies. I raised my hand on the minutes of the last meeting, so I'll wait until after we've gone back to the declaration.
Thank you, Councillor.
Oh, thank you. Right.
And Councillor Margaret Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's not on the declaration, it's actually on the item before it, which is apologies for absence. I wasn't giving Councillor Hughes his apologies, but we do understand that he has got some technical problems at the moment, which we're trying to help resolve. Right. And I think he's trying to get into the meeting. So I haven't given his apologies, but he's actually struggling at the moment.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Councillor Smith. We will wait.
Mayor, apologies. If it's not ideal, but if Councillor Hughes wants to attend at the Civic Centre, there is limited attendance at the moment in the room, so we can facilitate that if that will assist.
Councillor Smith, would that be a...
Well, as I say, at the moment, Phil's trying to help him to get on, and if he can't, I will pass that message along. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Smith. So we'll just leave that in abeyance and see what happens there. So where are we up to now? Sorry, I've lost misread. So we've done declarations of interest and we're now on the minutes, sorry. Can I call upon the Leader of the Council to move that the minutes be approved?
Hi, Mayor, happy to propose that.
And is that seconded? And then we can ask for questions. Is that seconded? Right. Are there any questions on the points of the accuracy or anything to do with the minutes?
Councillor Wharton Hardman.
Thank you, Mayor. So I contacted Democratic Services on the day of the meeting. I was conducting a volunteer emergency ambulance shift transporting COVID patients, which was overrunning. So I contacted on the afternoon of the meeting to say I wouldn't be available, but I noticed my apologies have not been noted in the minute.
Okay. Well, we can correct that. Thank you, Councillor. Are there any other questions or points that people want to make? No? Right then, and we'll move on. We're on to item 4 now, which are the Mayor's announcements. So then, are you sitting comfortably? Then I'll begin. December was busy, mostly virtually and mostly on the Mayor's Facebook page. To celebrate Lancashire Day, I recorded The Lion and Albert, which proved popular, and I plan to record some more monologues in the spring to celebrate Age Concern's 40th anniversary. Story time with the Mayor leading up to Christmas Eve seemed to attract grown-ups, but I'm sure children were listening. And I've just launched a request for children to write stories for me to read and record. Christmas greetings were sent to a range of groups and organisations, including the Red Rosettes, Postal Workers of Hospital, and I'd had interviews on Radio Leyland and for the Leyland Leader. A getting to know you interview. Something like, who would I like to take on a desert island? I wasn't quite sure about that one. Virtual events have included the banquet. Councillor Caleb Tomlinson, he won the quiz and graciously donated the prize, a sweet bouquet made by the Mayoress, which I delivered to Derrion House at a safe distance. I attended the Double Arts Christmas presentation virtually. Red Rosettes had a Christmas party, I attended that virtually, and St Catherine's AGM, another virtual meeting. I'm sure I've done other things as well, but I keep forgetting what I've been doing. Old age and poverty, probably. And one day I actually did something in person, all masks and distanced. A photo call with Sleep celebrating their 25th anniversary. A photo call with the Refuge and New Progress on White Ribbon Day. And to the end of the evening, the Mayoress and I froze to death under the Christmas tree and had our photographs taken. Being virtual seems to be reaching a wide demographic. Postings on the Mayor's Facebook page have reached nearly 31,000. The main event in January seems to have been me being vaccinated. So January has been quieter. And perhaps today, when we remember the Holocaust, it's appropriate for us to have a moment of stillness and quiet, just to remember. Thank you. And now I'm going to hand over to Councillor David Howarth, the Deputy Mayor, who will chair the rest of the meeting, mainly because I'm here because of the COVID stuff, and it's much easier to speak to the monitoring officer if he's nearby rather than remote. So I shall now just become an ordinary councillor. So over to you, Councillor Howarth.
Thank you, Mayor. Can I assure you, you'll never just be an ordinary councillor. For any members of the public watching on the live stream, and one in particular, can I just give the assurance that the sub has warmed up, he's off the bench and he's on the field of play. So item 5 is the Cabinet report. Could I ask the Leader of the Cabinet, Leader of the Council to present his reports of Cabinet to the Council?
Thanks, Mr Deputy Mayor. I'm happy to present the reports of Cabinet of the meeting on Wednesday the 16th of December and Wednesday the 20th of January 2021. I've nothing further to add in any detail. I've not heard any or been contacted by any specific questions about any of the agenda items or that contain within the report, and I'm happy to take any questions, as are my colleagues. Thank you.
Is that seconded?
Seconded, Chair. Deputy Mayor. Thank you. Councillor Witherington.
Thank you. Does anybody wish to speak on the report? In which case, can we note that? I'll take no opposition to that being noted, so thank you. That takes us on to item 6, the report of the Governance Committee. Can I call on the Chair of the Governance Committee, Councillor Ian Watkinson, to present his reports of governance to the Council?
Yeah, thanks, Mr Deputy Mayor. The reports are in the pack and cover the meetings in November, the extra meeting in December and in January. We did finally hear in December, we were finally able to approve the audited statement of accounts from 2018 to 2019 and 2019 to 2020. However, the audit findings report from our external auditors, Grant Thornton, included the issuing of a statutory 24 notice, which you'll hear about later at item number 9. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Is that seconded?
Seconded, Chair. Thank you. Councillor Sharp.
Thank you. Anybody wish to speak on the report? In which case I'll take that as it's noted. That takes us to item 7, report of the Scrutiny Committee. So I'll call on myself to present the report on the work of the Scrutiny Committee. We had 2 items on the last agenda at our last meeting. One was to go through the work and findings to date of the Climate Emergency Action Committee, and we also had our latest update on progress on Worden Hall. So could I ask for that to be seconded?
I'll second that, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Does anybody wish to speak to the report? In which case I'll take that as noted. That takes us to item 8, which is urgent decisions taken due to COVID-19. I'll call on the Leader of the Council, Councillor Paul Foster, to present the report.
Thanks, Mr Deputy Mayor. The Council will be aware that we've requested there's a standing item on all meetings of the Cabinet and all meetings of the Council of any urgent decisions taken under the COVID legislation. And these are presented tonight for Council to note. May I just add, Chair, that there are a couple of additional urgent decisions that either have just been made or are just about to be made in respect to South Ribble Borough Council directly supporting now some additional digital devices and data for our local schools. We're acutely aware as a council that some of our children just cannot access remote learning. There's a lot of discussion about this nationally, but unfortunately it doesn't help the kids who are suffering and trying to learn off phones basically. So we've intervened and the money is available, and I thank the officers for the work that they're doing, and they're directly in touch with our local schools. Additionally, Councillor James Flannery and the business working group have approached Cabinet with deep concerns about a number of businesses within South Ribble that are still unable to access any form of government grant at the moment. And so we're looking at another urgent decision to support those businesses that have been left behind that can't currently access grants. And I thank the working group, for which I know you're a member of, Chair, and Councillor Flannery as the Chair for bringing this forward to us. We'll continue to do whatever we need to do to support our community. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for that report?
I can second that, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Titherington. Does anybody wish to comment? Councillor Mrs Smith.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Mayor. And I would wholeheartedly support the initiative for the tablets or laptops or whatever it is that we're actually doing. I did speak to the Chief Executive about it some weeks ago, and I do think we should do all that we possibly can to help out in this situation. So you have our wholehearted support. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else wish to speak on the report? If not, can we note that? I'll take that as noted. That takes us to item 9, which is the external audit findings report and the written recommendations. And I call upon the Leader of the Council, Councillor Paul Foster, to move the recommendations in the report.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Mayor, and please bear with me. I've got a few things to say, if I may, in moving the recommendations. Mr Deputy Mayor, this administration always attempts to look forward at what changes we can make to the lives of our local community, initiatives we can deliver, support we can offer during a pandemic that has so far killed over 100,000 people. However, as is the norm in respect to our annual accounts and value for money conclusions, we take a look back with our statutory auditor, Grant Thornton. Unfortunately, as we're all acutely aware, prior to May 2019, this council was in a bad place. Let's then go back to the 2018-19 financial year. We will have all seen the headline in the Lancashire Evening Post, Mr Deputy Mayor, quoting our external auditor, Mr Mark Stocks, and I quote, "I've rarely seen anything like this." And to be bluntly honest, neither have I. We spent 4 years in opposition, publicly and privately challenging the former Conservative administration and senior officers, as it was abundantly clear to all that this council was in free fall, with a total lack of corporate governance, underperformance, the overriding of financial controls, and absolutely no political leadership. The auditor then goes on to state, Mr Deputy Mayor, that he had rarely seen shortcomings like those uncovered at our authority in more than 30 years of doing his job. Let that finally sink in to members of the Conservative group who are genuinely still in denial at the damage their long-running internal feud caused to this council. The long-delayed external audit report, examining the then Conservative group's affairs during 2018-19, which we are all aware was held up after the election of a new Labour minority administration, who committed to ensuring a full and frank disclosure of all legacy issues to the statutory bodies. Both our own internal audit team and now the external auditor have commented on a raft of issues with how the council has operated in recent years, detailing how rules and procedures at the authority had been consistently breached. The council did not have proper arrangements to secure economy, efficiency and effectiveness in its use of resources, commenting upon underperformance within individual service areas. The report also highlighted the potential for management override of control. And to quote Mr Stocks, this is the ability to circumvent rules put in place to preserve financial probity, and it was a matter to be treated with the utmost seriousness. Mr Deputy Mayor, we do treat this with the utmost seriousness, and thus why we ensured full disclosure. Another direct quote from our external auditor should also be ringing in the ears of some, and I quote, "I have been doing this job for over 30 years now, and it's quite rare that a council's control environment is operating inappropriately." I end the quote. Then we move to leisure, and members will recall the denials from the former cabinet member to this very council regarding the total mismanagement of the proposed new leisure facilities that were under his direct control. As the Lancashire Evening Post states, and I quote once again, "Some of the strongest criticism was reserved for the matters relating to the council's leisure services. The external auditor highlighted that £275,000 has now been written off as a result of previous plans for a health and wellbeing campus on land next to the authority's headquarters in Leyland." Unquote. The auditor notes that updates were never formally provided to the entire cabinet, despite the then political leadership being in possession of them. The previous cabinet member, who by his own admission has read every one of the leisure contracts back to front on a number of occasions, and, in his words, was the only person who ever had, never unfortunately picked up on the potential pension liability as it transpires, because he failed to monitor the value of a bond put in place by Serco to cover any shortfall in pension costs. Because of this, Mr Deputy Mayor, a potential £2 million shortfall has a bond in place worth £45,000. Our auditor, Mr. Stocks, said the management of the issue had been poor. Elected members may wish to draw a slightly different adjective to describe this. To conclude on the actual report, I will let Mr. Stocks have the final word. In his overall assessment of the then Conservative controlled council, Mr. Stocks is withering. I have rarely seen in my career where there has been such a fundamental breakdown, not only in the governance arrangements of the council, but also in its service performance and control environment, unquote. As I stated at the Governance Committee, nothing within this report was any surprise to me. The majority of it was self-declared within the annual governance statement when the new management team and political leadership discovered it. It really was a catastrophic failure of corporate governance. As leader of the council, I publicly state again that I now own this. The entire council now owns this. And we've taken great strides in putting this right. The external auditor himself recognises the transparency and compliance of the new administration in his 2019-20 report, and he also recognises the vast improvements we have made. Of the issues specifically highlighted within the Section 24 notice, I can confirm to Council the following. 1. Service performance has significantly improved, and as I said, this was recognised in the 19-20 report. Number 2. The Council now operates within all its financial controls in line with financial regulations. Number 3, we've appointed a new Chief Finance Officer, also referred to as the Section 151 Officer, who takes up the permanent post in the coming weeks. And finally, Mr. Deputy Mayor, number 4, member conduct. Member conduct. Enough is enough, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Despite all the challenges, despite the pandemic, despite numerous warnings and instructions from the Standards Committee, the same members continue to act in a way that is wholly unacceptable. I now call upon Council to directly intervene, and I think we will. When political group discipline cannot be enforced within the political groups, then Council has no option but to intervene. Finally, again, as I have said previously, we are committed to a culture of compliance and transparency and will continue to now fully comply with all legislation, good practice and within the Constitution guidelines as we have done from the moment we formed an administration. From this point forward, Mr. Deputy Mayor, the failings of this council are now a distant memory from a previous administration. We don't want to discuss it anymore. This exceptionally unfortunate period is now behind us. I think all members and residents can see the monumental changes that have taken place. I commend the report and the recommendations to Council. Thank you.
Do we have a seconder for the recommendations?
Seconded, Deputy Mayor, and in so doing, I'd just like to recognise that the issues identified by the leader in his presentation are historical and date back to 2018-19. Since then, we've been busy addressing those issues, and I understand that we're about 95% complete on the actions that are recommended by the external auditor. So I think it's right, as been said again by the leader, that we learn our lessons and we acknowledge the learning that comes from those lessons and move on. So I second the leader's report. Thank you, Chair, Deputy Mayor.
So if I can just bring in the monitoring officer.
Thank you, Mayor. It's just for two factual corrections in the body of the report, and I apologise to members for this. Paragraph 8, the correct date of the meeting was in fact the 22nd of December, not the 23rd. And in paragraph 13 on the same page 30, it reads that the governance issues have been previously raised in 2014. It should have said 2018. I apologise for that.
Okay, thank you. If I can now bring in members of the council who may wish to comment or ask any questions. Can I start with Councillor Trafford?
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. This is obviously a damning report, and one of the things I'd like to focus on is a theme throughout, which is in relation to member conduct. Whilst not confirmed, but certainly suspected, it may well be the case that there were deliberate intentions to ignore financial controls from members. Now, from my own experience here, it's very easy to see how that could well be the case. I've seen numerous inappropriate challenges to officers by members, as quoted in the report, which normally seems to come from a place of arrogance, which some members who've been here for a long time seem to think is acceptable. When we had our meeting about our chief executive, we had to be reminded by the monitoring officer in that very meeting that deliberate attempts to ignore legal advice is one of the reasons that we've become into such a mess, and that was in the meeting concerning such issues. My worry is that this arrogance has created a culture which believes experience outweighs expertise, which it doesn't, because some people are very experienced at doing things very badly. The decisions that we take on behalf of our residents should be done on an informed basis with respect to the highly qualified guidance that we're given by our staff. Such expertise should only be challenged with good reason, not on the basis of pre-existing prejudice for party political reasons. Having this report in mind and its recommendations, I won't be patronised ever again by certain members for having less experience on this council than themselves, especially when this report is so damning to those with so much self-professed experience. So what I'd say is, Mr. Deputy Mayor, that to those listening to this, if the shoe fits, those councillors should wear it, and that way we can move on and battle a culture of political arrogance and post-truth. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Could I call on Councillor Thirlbourne?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I'd just like to bring the leader's attention to item 19 on page 33, performance security. Just got a question for him. Will the leader allow the scrutiny committee to commit in-depth reviews of departments to see what improvements can be made?
The Scrutiny Committee, Councillor Thurban, can look at absolutely anything they wish in this authority, just as the Governance Committee can.
Thank you, Councillor Foster, for that.
Okay, if I can just say at this stage, if you would like to submit that as a consideration for the Scrutiny Committee work plan going forward, clearly we can look at it. Could I now bring in Councillor Mrs. Margaret Smith?
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. There's just a number of things I'd just like to make reference to, which Councillor Foster has made reference to this evening. The AGS, the governance statement, actually does cover not only 1819, but it also covers 1920, and both of them have got a section 24 with them, because some of the audit reports that were put together actually do cover and go into the following years. So I think we've got to be aware of that. He's made great play of the audit report regarding the leisure services. Some of the findings in that leisure services report were quite clearly taken as a one-sided report by a certain officer. I mentioned this particularly at the governance meeting to our auditor, and he took on board that without actually going through in a very forensic way the audits that have been taken, he actually could not say with clarity that they were completely unbiased. That having said, there are a number of issues that were taken up within those AGS reports that actually will, I think, bear fruition in time to come. We've also got to bear in mind that there were very much a situation where a lot of the people who could have given evidence to those audit reports were no longer available to be interviewed. So we have got to take them as we see them, but there are obviously a lot of issues within there that had various implications, but people could not actually counteract what was said. Having said all that, we know as a council that during those periods there was difficulties, and we have never backed away from that. And we accept that this report is going forward, and we will make every endeavour to actually conform and work with it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Could I call on Councillor Ogilvie?
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Yeah, just a question about paragraph 25 on page 34. The leader has quite correctly raised the issue of robust financial control. At paragraph 25, there's a table with 2 actions that they say will be implemented, 2 important ones, I think. However, that's immediately followed by paragraph 26, which then says it may not be possible for the system to be amended to allow those actions to be implemented. And I just wonder if you could give us an update on whether those 2 actions will in fact be implemented, or whether there's further work to be done. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to ask Councillor Foster to summate at the end, because there are a number of points being raised now. At this point, can I bring the Chief Executive in?
Sorry, it's the monitoring officer. I'm sorry, you've been downgraded in your response, Councillor Ogilvie. Yeah, we're currently discussing with the software provider to try and ensure that we can deliver these as quickly as possible. There'll be a comprehensive response given to Governance Committee in March, I think is the commitment. We are trying to introduce compensatory controls as well. I can't give you details of what those are, but we are looking to manage these processes better than they were being managed. Ideally, in line with the Council's approach to the digital strategy, we're trying to do this as much using technology rather than physical intervention, if you like, but we will use physical intervention in the short term.
Thank you. Could I bring in Councillor Tomlinson?
Which one, Chair? Is it me?
Sorry. Yes, Matthew Tomlinson.
Thank you, Chair. I think we've heard a couple of people referring to moving on now, and I think it is important that we do move on. But in doing so, it's massively important that we don't take our eyes off what did go so horribly wrong at this council. I've been a member here for nearly 22 years now, and the final 2 years of the previous administration were, without a doubt, the most challenging and difficult for a member focused on doing what was best for our residents. We had members who acted independently of advice they were given from officers. We ended up in the year 2018-19, let's not forget, with 3 or possibly even 4 leaders of the council. It was such a chaotic atmosphere, including a memorable month where a council with a Conservative majority managed to elect a Labour leader for a month. So I think, to put it into context, just what a state we allowed ourselves to get in. So it's really important we don't forget how we got there. The behaviour, in my view, of some members was reprehensible, and it allowed some officers also to overstep the behaviours that we would normally expect under good governance. I am a little disappointed tonight to hear some people start to pick away at the report, because as someone who has been around, as I said, for a while now, I've been in a position where things have not gone well for me. And I think the worst thing you can do is to try and shoot the messenger. The message is what the message is. It's come from a qualified external auditor. And as the leader have said, we ought to take on board every single comment that they make, every recommendation that they make, and make sure that the authority as a whole, whoever's in charge in years to come, cannot get itself into such a place as we did. Obviously I'll support the recommendation, but it is absolutely imperative we learn that what went wrong, accept that what went wrong, and make sure it can never happen again. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Phil Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. There's one or two items which I would just like to comment on. I'll comment on with regard to the pension liability. The pension liability was known by this council for a long, long time. The pension liability was in the audited accounts of the Leisure Trust, which are presented to the council. And not only that, when the accounts are drawn up and the accounts, we have meetings to discuss the accounts, the matter of the pension liability was brought up each time to officers of this council. And with regard to understanding all the details of the various agreements, legal agreements that we have with the Trust and with Serco, I've yet to meet a councillor, in fact most officers, to understand the county council pension system, how that works, how the investments operate, and to fully understand. So the council knew at the time that there was a pension deficit going on. I think that's probably it for me. There's a lot of comments there which are, as far as I can see, are blatantly untrue, but I think with regard to these statements, the auditor's report, we are where we are with that. We've got to look forward to that. We've got to look forward to the improvements, and we have to accept the auditor's findings. And I think Councillor Mrs. Smith has already said that obviously it would take too much time, too much money and too much effort, I suppose, to look back and do a proper in-depth look at some of the items. So I think it's interests of the whole council, the community, to go forward. We accept those, and we've got to work with them. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. At this stage, do we have any other members who wish to speak? And I can't see any raised hands. We've had no written representations from the public. So could I invite Councillor Foster to briefly sum up?
Thanks, Mr. Deputy Mayor. I think I'm really disappointed, because one of the ways that we as a council move forward is by all councillors accepting there's been a problem, and all councillors accepting that they want to move forward and acknowledge the steps we've taken to put these problems right. If I may, I'm going to answer directly a couple of the points that were raised by Councillor Phil Smith first. You've openly stated, as we know, Councillor Phil Smith, that you were aware of the deficit in the pension fund. For some reason, this was never reflected in our accounts or dealt with for a number of years. It's only been dealt with now. You say it's blatantly untrue, a number of the statements made by the internal auditors and the external auditors. I think you need to tell council what's blatantly untrue, Councillor Smith, because this is fundamentally one of the major problems we have had, as a council, is the reluctance of certain members, senior members of the Conservative group, to accept what statutory officers and what auditors tell them. They have done that now, you have done that now for a number of years, and that has directly led to the position we found ourselves in. Councillor Mrs Smith made the point that, again, there's a raft of evidence, she states, in public that counter what the internal audit and external audit say about leisure services. She stated publicly that officers' opinions are biased. Officers' opinions are biased. Again, she questions the integrity of the authors of some of the reports as well. And I say to all council, and this in many ways is a reflection of what Councillor Matthew Trafford said, that you may want things to be different, Councillor Mrs Smith. You may regret where we've got to, but you have to take responsibility. Council now takes responsibility. These issues have been dealt with, but whatever you say, the truth will never go away. And in respect to the leisure, I ask again publicly, as we did in a cabinet meeting approximately 8 to 10 months ago, if you have evidence, please provide it to the statutory officers, because so far you haven't done. Mr Deputy Mayor, I'll close now, and I think we should take the recommendations to a vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I remind members that we are now voting on the 4 recommendations that have been put forward, and I'll call on the monitoring officer to take a vote by roll call. So as and when your name is called, if you could indicate whether you are in favour of those recommendations or against.
Thank you, Mayor. For clarity, the recommendations are that the Council confirm that they have fully considered the audit findings report for the years 2018-19 and 2019-20 presented by external audit, and they acknowledge the Section 24 recommendations made therein, that the actions taken to address the Section 24 written recommendations detailed within the report are noted, that the proposed actions at paragraphs 18, 24 and 31 are approved for implementation, and that the Council affirm their commitment to continuous improvement. Councillor Adams.
Sorry, just before we go to the vote, can I just ask members to remain muted until such time as your name is called, because we are getting some background noise. It's been suggested that we just ask, is anybody against? Because if we're all in favour of these recommendations, there's no point in dragging this out. So is anybody actually against the recommendations? I can't see anybody indicating that they are. So can we take it then that this is a unanimous acceptance of those recommendations? Thank you. That then takes us on to item 10, which is the review of the cabinet portfolios. And if I can call on the leader of the council to move the recommendations in the report.
Thanks, Mr Deputy Mayor. As all members of council will know, Councillor Sue Jones is without doubt one of the most polite, nice, thorough, likeable people you could ever want to meet, and I've had the absolute privilege of Sue being part of what was the shadow cabinet for 4 years, and then nearly 2 years now as a member of the cabinet. I wish I could present myself and speak as Sue does at times. She does everything with a smile, and she's so thorough. We all know, though, as well, that Sue's had a really traumatic 18 months with the loss of a husband, former councillor Ken Jones. Sue's therefore spoke to me a number of times over the last 6 or 12 months, and she's decided that it's time to go on the back benches, so to speak, and support the council in those areas. and we are absolutely, totally and fully supportive of Sue's decision. I can't possibly come to imagine how Sue's feeling at the moment, particularly with after the loss of Ken, the fact we've had this appalling pandemic and the isolation and loneliness that brings with it. So on behalf of myself, on behalf of every member of this council, on behalf of every officer and behalf of every resident, thank you, Sue, for everything that you've done for us, working with us on Cabinet, and we look forward, as is coming in the future, to you sitting on the scrutiny committee and scrutinising us and supporting us in everything that we do. Because Sue decided to go and sit on the back benches, we've had to therefore, Mr Deputy Mayor, make some changes to the Cabinet. This has actually gone through quite a lot of discussion with the Chief Executive, where there has been some tweaks to the portfolios, and as all members are aware, there's been a number of changes in regards to the shared services as well. So the portfolios now more fully reflect and sit more comfortably with the officer structure of the council. Clearly, we're not wanting to make any more fundamental changes. We're in the midst of a pandemic, and I have agreed with my Cabinet colleagues that we'll look at this again in May at the annual meeting of the council. If it's working, good. If it's not working, then we can always make some tweaks. So the paper's there with the updated portfolios and responsibilities. Additionally, all members will be aware that there have been some fundamental changes to the corporate plan and the corporate priorities over the last 18 months, and we are now looking to introduce lead members to champion some particular areas which are key corporate priorities moving forward. These lead members' terms of reference are going to be developed and presented to Cabinet in the coming weeks, and they're going to be for youth and mental health awareness. And I point out this is the mental health awareness of everybody within the borough, not just the youth. I have the pleasure of Councillor Matthew Trafford accepting that role. We've got the lead member for social equality and justice, Councillor Jackie Alty, and the lead member for climate change, Councillor Keith Martin. Climate change has to be our priority. And finally, we're introducing a member champion for volunteering, and I think the Deputy Mayor is going to announce who that is in a moment. Given that, Mr Deputy Mayor, I'm happy to propose the introduction of the lead members, and the Cabinet portfolios are for noting. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Well, can I first of all say that the nomination for the volunteering champion is our former mayor and local volunteer himself, Councillor Harry Hancock. So with that name added to the recommendations, do I have a seconder?
Councillor Sitherington, Deputy Mayor. Yes, I second that. And can I say, in so doing, can I just pay my tribute to the work that Councillor Sue Jones has done during her time as the portfolio holder. I, like the leader, have always been an admirer of how she has performed her duties in a conscientious way. She's always been civil to people, and she's always been thorough in everything she does. And I know that she will be around to assist us in anything that we do in going forward, anything that is in a positive vein, then she will be supporting it. So I had my, well, not congratulations, but I had my appreciation for the tremendous work that Councillor Sue Jones has done during her time on the Cabinet, and I second the proposals. Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Could I bring in Councillor Mrs Margaret Smith?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I just wanted to have it noted that we, the Conservative group, have appreciated very much Councillor Mrs Jones's work on the Cabinet. She has been an extremely hard-working cabinet member. She has been impartial in the way she has taken forward issues that have come forward. I know she has been particularly helpful as regards the word and park problems and parking on there. And also she has always had the ability to get to the point and make sure that she always came back to people and returned their work, their calls, and also to answer their queries. And we wish her all the best and hope that she enjoys her time on scrutiny. And we thank her for all her hard work that she has done for the council over the last 2 years. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Could I bring in Councillor Ogilvie?
Thank you. Yes, I just wanted to echo the comments from Councillor Mrs. Margaret Smith there. I'm speaking specifically now as a ward member responsible for Warden Park. Sue will probably smile when I say that I have frequently pestered her with issues about parking and environmental issues in and around the park. I have always found her very polite, very reactive, and gets back to me as quickly as possible and has tried to put in actions that would help the situation. So I just wanted to thank Councillor Jones for that, and I wish her well going forwards. Thank you.
Councillor Thirlbourne.
I'd just like to thank Councillor Jones and her husband for putting me forward as Vice Chair of the Emergency Climate Change Committee. It was an honour, actually, so thank you very much to both of you to do this and to sit on that committee. So, Sue, I'm very sad to see you stepping down from your position, and I hope you can guide me through some more of the deeper parts of scrutiny, and I welcome you to the scrutiny committee. So thank you very much.
Councillor Bretherton.
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Mayor. I'd just like to echo my Conservative colleagues' comments, but also as a new member, myself and Councillor Campbell were very much welcomed by Councillor Jones, and she was very helpful in our project of getting the Friends group together at Walton Park. If it wasn't for Councillor Jones, it would have been very difficult for us probably to find our initial footings at the time that we got elected, and as a result we've now got the playground, so thank you very much.
Councillor the Mayor. The Mayor, would you like to unmute?
Right. So she's always been extremely supportive as me. She gave me lots of lifts. She's ever so good at her job. And during this pandemic, we have kept each other sane. So thanks, Sue, but I think you're going to find her a bit of a challenge on scrutiny. She's not the meek, grey-haired old lady who sits in a corner. So watch yourselves. So anyway, from our lot, thanks, Sue.
Thank you for that. I for one would never suggest any such thing, and she will be more than welcome on the scrutiny committee. I can only echo all of from the chair, all of the sentiments that have been expressed. Do wish you well and look forward to working with you in the future. On agenda item 10, do we have any further questions on the recommendations or comments on the recommendations that have been put forward? I can't see any. Can I again then ask, is there anybody who objects or is against those recommendations? Councillor Green has raised his hand. Would you like to speak?
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Can I associate myself with the comments about Councillor Jones as well? Wish you every success for the future and look forward to serving with her on the scrutiny committee. Mr. Deputy Mayor, unfortunately I can't support all the recommendations in this report, so I'll be voting against.
Thank you. In which case that now means we need to take a vote by roll call. So again, could you mute your microphones until such time as your name is called, and then say whether you are for or against the recommendations as are set out. I'll call on the monitoring officer.
Thank you, Mayor. Just on a point on, there are two recommendations. It is the second recommendation that the council are being asked to vote on. The first one is just for noting. Just to clarify the second recommendation as well, it is a proposal to award the special allowance for the lead members. That will be subject to agreement by IRP, and it won't be paid until the independent remuneration panel has approved that. I think Councillor Green wants to come back in.
We had actually moved to the vote, but Councillor Green and Councillor Trafford have both indicated they would wish to speak. So, as this is the first time I've chaired this meeting and being a rather pleasant chap, I will allow you both. Councillor Trafford first and then Councillor Green.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Mayor. My fault, I should have indicated to speak earlier. Just echoing obviously everything that has been said about Councillor Jones, and just saying, should this be accepted, what an honour it'll be should council approve the role for me to be our lead member for youth and mental health awareness. We have a mental health crisis at the moment, and I look forward to developing some policies on that. And what I'll finalise by saying, but maybe Councillor Green, when he comes in, will address this, is that if you are going to vote against the creation of a lead member for climate change, youth and mental health and social justice, it's normally a pretty decent courtesy to the residents that we represent to at least bother to give a reason to explain why. But maybe that's what he's going to do now, in which case I apologise if he does. Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Right, okay, I wasn't reopening a debate here. Councillor Green.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Mayor, and I won't respond to Councillor Trafford. My concern over voting was in terms of voting for recommendation 3, in the light of the fact that I think it needs to go to the member remuneration panel first. From my understanding of what has just been clarified, I think that is the case. So I was just indicating to speak in the hope of being helpful and maybe avoiding the need for a recorded vote for all members. But I don't know if any other members have concerns, obviously.
Okay, well, on that point, I'll bring in the monitoring officer for clarification.
Yeah, just to confirm to members, the proposal at paragraph 3 is not to immediately award the £1,500 special allowance. It is to propose that to IRP for approval, and then it will be implemented after approval. So, I assume, Councillor Green, I can see you nodding, and I'm assuming you're withdrawing your objections at this point.
Yes, through the Deputy Mayor. Yes, I am, Mr Meister.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody else who has any objections? Right, I can't see any, in which case, if I can take that we're all in agreement with those recommendations. Thank you, and we will move on to item 11. Item 11 is changes to committee membership, and I call upon the leader again to move the recommendations in the report.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Mayor. The changes are in recommendations there that Councillor Chris Lomax replaces Councillor McHiggins on the Planning Committee, and that Councillor Sue Jones replaces Councillor Chris Lomax on the Scrutiny Committee, and I submit those recommendations to Council.
Thank you. I have an indication from, I think it might be Councillor Caleb Tomlinson. Sorry, yes, can we have a seconder for that first?
Seconded, Chair. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, and I think Councillor Caleb Tomlinson wanted to come in.
Yes, good evening, Deputy Mayor. Can you all hear me? Good. Fellow councillors, please bear with me. I've decided to read from a pre-prepared script which I wrote last year. Given the significant nature of my intervention and amendment, I wish to propose to Council in respect to the membership of the Planning Committee. As all elected members will be aware, I do take my duties quite seriously as the chair of the planning committee. I allow all committee members to speak. I'm always apolitical and I am wholly fair and reasonable. And this is critically important given the quasi-judicial legal standing of the committee and the decisions we are making. Planning law and the council's constitution is clear as to how matters, and most importantly, how elected members should be conducting themselves. Unfortunately, I must report to council that the continued unacceptable conduct from a particular member is placing the council at risk of legal challenge and is most certainly bringing this council into disrepute. I am therefore seeking council's support with direct intervention. Most members will already be aware of Councillor Yates's continued public challenging of legal advice from the council's legal team and his continued unfounded allegations of personal and pecuniary interests against Labour and Liberal Democrat members of the committee. Despite being advised numerous times, both publicly and privately, that his views are unfounded, he continues to make these allegations in a public forum. Furthermore, his aggressive and challenging conduct towards other members on the committee has led to members abstaining in voting on issues due to personal threats of legal action being raised by Councillor Yates, threatening in meetings he was going to, and I quote, call the police with a phone in his hand. There is never any place for bullying or intimidation in any form, in any walk of life. The two particular meetings where Councillor Yates has acted wholly inappropriately are unfortunately out in the public domain due to the fact they were broadcast live on YouTube, and I am aware that council is also in possession of several complaints regarding his conduct. Finally, I am also becoming increasingly concerned at the general conduct of certain members in respect to false political statements continually being made at the planning committee, and I continue to warn certain colleagues that this is unacceptable. And if this continues, I will bring a further report to council, because enough's enough. I've shared my concerns regarding the continued inappropriate conduct of Councillor Yates with the council leader and the monitoring officer, and I am also aware that these have been raised directly with the leader of the Conservative group. However, due to a lack of any direct action, I now feel that Councillor Yates' continued presence on the planning committee is untenable, placing the council at risk of legal challenge, continually bringing us into disrepute. His direct threats have also led to members not casting votes in determining planning applications, which is unacceptable. I would remind members of the discussion we had at the last planning committee about how they should conduct themselves and how we have a duty to deal with the code of conduct. I therefore wish to propose amending the recommendations by adding the following recommendation. Councillor Yates is removed from the planning committee with immediate effect, and the Conservative group nomination for a replacement to be made at this or a future meeting of the council. Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. As that is an amendment to the recommendations to add a recommendation 3, do I have a seconder? Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. I'd like to second that motion, that proposal by Caleb Tomlinson. Having watched the planning meetings involving applications for both Pickering's Farm and the venue in Penwitham, I was alarmed at the totally unacceptable behaviour of certain members of the planning committee, and in particular Councillor Barry Yates. To enter into political diatribe and petty point scoring or a quasi-judicial meeting in itself is not acceptable, but the opportunity to threaten and intimidate other members of the committee to the extent that it influences the way they vote, whilst ignoring and showing contempt towards officer legal advice, cannot be allowed to continue. We have been issued with a Section 24 notice on which we need to act. In view of that notice and the behaviour of Councillor Yates, who instead of changing his ways is now wasting time, more officers' time, in a tit-for-tat standards complaint, despite all of the officers' advice received. I second that motion, and I'd just like to say I join this council to lift the chinning bar, not lower it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Foster.
I'm willing to accept that amendment and the additional recommendations to the report, Mr Deputy Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Before bringing Councillor Yates, are there any other amendments to the... Right, okay. So, Councillor Titherington, are you okay as the seconder to accept that?
Chair, did you say Councillor? I mean, I don't believe that I did second it. It was Councillor Titherington who seconded it.
Yeah, sorry, Councillor Titherington. I believe you seconded the substantive motion, the substantive report as proposed by Councillor Foster. So what I'm asking is, as the seconder, would you accept the amendment as just proposed by Councillor Caleb Tomlinson and seconded by Councillor Turner?
Sorry, Deputy Mayor. Yeah, I understand now. Yes, I would accept that amendment.
Okay, thank you. Can I just ask, do we have any other amendments? Because I believe there may be one with regards to membership of the Standards Committee.
Yes, sorry, Mr Deputy Mayor, that's my error. The Labour group has been holding a vacancy on the Standards Committee for a number of months now, since Councillor Ken Jones left us, and so we would like to propose that Councillor Sue Jones takes that position on the Standards Committee. Thank you.
Thank you. And is that seconded?
Seconded.
Right, thank you. That then gives us 4 recommendations as it stands. What I plan to do when we come to the vote is I'm going to take all of those individually. Otherwise, people who may be quite satisfied with some appointments may not be satisfied with the others, and I don't think it's right to take them on block. So I will take those individually when we come to them. The next person who's indicated he wishes to speak is Councillor Barry Yates.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Mayor. I did put an interest in, but I feel like I have to speak on my behalf. My legal team have put something down for me to say. But I must disagree with the chairman of the committee and the seconder, because the reasons for that is that you should look at themselves before they look at other people. I have served on the planning committee for 28 years as a member of that committee, and have never been found guilty of any charges on any committee of the council for 30 years. So I find this quite astonishing and probably political. Any decision made by full council this evening will predetermine the Standards Committee's inquiry into a complaint against me and bring the procedures into disrepute. One of the seconders that you came up with there is the person that's putting a complaint against me. So you'll understand what I'm saying there. If I am to be removed from the committee by the council, I am entitled to know what reasons are being advanced so I can responsibly respond to them and in the interest of natural justice and fairness. This has not been allowed to me because it's the first time that I have heard anyone raise a complaint against me. So what I'm saying to Mr. Mayor is that, Mr. Deputy Mayor, sorry, is that I do not accept the claims that put before me, I cannot respond because I haven't had them in writing beforehand. And it does say that the council should act as a reasonably at all times. I find that this is not reasonable. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wharton-Hardman.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. I just wanted to raise two things. Number one, I am still a member of the Appeals Committee, and I have been since I was a Conservative member. So I'm quite happy to propose, if somebody wants a second, to remove me from that committee to allow political impartiality on that, because currently there's a Liberal Democrat, a Labour and myself as an independent, so that's probably been missed. So I was going to propose an amendment to have me removed from that. And secondly, I just wanted to support the amendment made by the Labour colleagues this evening. Councillor Yates has made a number of comments. I've listened to the YouTube and watched those, and it's just abhorrent completely. So I will be supporting their amendment. But I just wanted to propose a further amendment to remove myself from the Appeals Committee.
Thank you for that. Do we have a seconder for your amendment?
As Councillor Wharton-Hardman is an independent member, I'm happy to second his request.
Okay, perhaps Councillor Smith might want to consider a replacement before the end of the meeting, but that's seconded. So. Sorry, yes, I was just saying I'll take that as a separate vote as well, so that'll be item 5 on the recommendations. I now have Councillor Mrs. Margaret Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. You caught me unawares, actually, asking me to find a replacement immediately for Councillor Wharton-Hardman, but I will take it on board and make sure that by the next council meeting it is sorted out. If it is our spot that we need to put somebody on to the Appeals Committee for proportionality. I'm glad you're going to take the amendments and the recommendations separately, Mr. Mayor, because I do feel that that is the right way forward, because there are things obviously that we can vote for and ones that I would not want to vote for. I have to say that at this moment in time, I feel it very difficult that this has been brought forward. To me, Barry has apologised to the council, he has apologised to the committee, and he has said he would like to put him forward himself to go to standards. That, I think, is the appropriate way forward. And I don't think we should actually be discussing the whys and the wherefores of what went on at the planning committee when the standards committee could very well have to rule on it. And therefore, we don't want to undermine the standards committee in any way. And I think that is the appropriate place for it to go. I do feel at this moment in time that there has been some references to why I haven't done certain things. I am awaiting the standards outcome, and at that time I will take the appropriate action that our group feel is necessary if there is to be a sanction. At that point, I feel that we should now take the vote, because I don't think we should actually go much deeper into these things, because it could prejudice further proceedings. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. I have Councillor Trafford wishing to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. I'm not on standards and I'm not here to keep quiet, so I will say what I think on this matter. As someone who was at the expense of some of these outbursts that have been referenced, I thought that I'd respond. If, when defending yourself against being removed from a committee, the only justification you can give is, I've been here a long time, which earlier I mentioned about thinking experience outweighs expertise, that doesn't strengthen your case. If anything, it makes it worse, because if you've been here so long and you take so much pride in being here for so long, you should know better than the behaviour of which you're responsible for. I'm absolutely amazed by this situation. I'm amazed that this wasn't dealt with earlier. The bullying, the aggressive outbursts is totally unacceptable, and it's quite frankly embarrassing. These should be discussed publicly. The meetings were done in public, and people should have the right to respond in doing that. And I look forward to moving to the vote. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Do we have any other members who wish to speak on this item at this time? In which case there have been no written representations from the public, so could I invite Councillor Foster to sum up on the item?
Thanks, Mr. Deputy Mayor. I think all members of the council need to look at what the external auditor said. Look what the external auditor said about member conduct. And all members of this council just supported the paper that we endorsed and the recommendations stating that we will deal with member conduct if group leaders won't. The problem I have with this, I watched the planning committee, Mr. Deputy Mayor, and it was awful. And I tell you when it was awful was when a member of the Liberal Democrat group abstains in a vote because of direct threats from another member on the planning committee threatening to call the police. Councillor Mrs Smith, the leader of the Conservative group, has had an opportunity, and I've basically been pleading with her, just to nip this in the bud and take Councillor Yates off the committee so that council can move forward, and she refused to do so. And I know that Councillor Mrs Smith says she will do that after the Standards Committee has met. Unfortunately, two of her members, it took 2 years, council, to sort of apologise for the Nazi allegations against members of the Labour group. 2 years. And then they refused to apologise at council as they were supposed to do. And then Councillor Mrs Smith didn't take any action. Discipline of members cannot be dealt with through the standards regime. The standards regime is appallingly poor. Therefore, I've said, as leader of this council, we will deal with discipline ourselves in exceptional circumstances. This is an exceptional circumstance. I'll close there. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. In which case, as I previously indicated, I'm now going to take the 5 recommendations in order. So the first recommendation is that Councillor Chris Lomax replace Councillor Mick Higgins on the Planning Committee. Is there anybody against that recommendation? In which case I'll take that as approved. The second recommendation is that Councillor Sue Jones replace Councillor Chris Lomax on the Scrutiny Committee, and given the number of welcomes she's received, I'm pretty sure there's nobody objecting to that one. So can we take that as approved? The third item is that Councillor Barry Yates be removed from the Planning Committee, and I suspect this is going to have to go to a vote. So I will call on the monitoring officer to take a vote by roll call. Again, please keep your microphones muted and say for the proposal that Councillor Yates be removed, or against when your name is called, and I'll call on the monitoring officer.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillor Adams.
For.
Councillor Alty.
For.
Councillor Bell.
For.
Councillor Blow.
For.
Councillor Bretherton.
Against.
Councillor Belinsky-Gelder.
For.
Councillor Campbell.
Against.
Councillor Chisholm.
Against.
Councillor Clark.
Against.
Councillor Colton.
Against.
Councillor Donoghue.
For.
Councillor Evans.
For.
Councillor Flannery.
For.
Councillor Forrest.
For.
Councillor Foster.
For.
Councillor Mary Green.
Against.
Councillor Michael Green.
Against.
Councillor Hancock.
For.
Councillor Hesketh.
Against.
Councillor Higgins. Councillor Higgins.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Howarth.
For.
Councillor Hughes.
Against.
Councillor Susan Jones.
For.
Councillor Lomax.
For.
Councillor Marsh.
Against.
Councillor Martin.
For.
Councillor Melia.
For.
Councillor Moon.
Against.
Councillor Mort.
Against.
Councillor Mullineaux.
Against.
Councillor Ogilvie.
Against.
Councillor Rainsbury.
Against.
Councillor Sharples.
For.
Councillor Shaw.
For.
Councillor Margaret Smith.
Against.
Councillor Phil Smith.
Against.
Councillor Suthers.
For.
Councillor Thirlbourne.
Against.
Councillor Titherington.
For.
Councillor Caleb Tomlinson.
For.
Councillor Matthew Tomlinson.
For.
Councillor Trafford.
For.
Councillor Turner.
For.
Councillor Walton.
Against.
Councillor Watkinson.
For.
Councillor Watson.
Against.
Councillor Wharton Hardman.
For.
Councillor Wooldridge.
For.
Councillor Yates.
Against.
Okay, that's carried. Sorry. Got 28 for, 21 against. Yeah.
Right, thank you. That's carried with 28 votes for and 21 votes against. And by definition, under proportionality, if I could invite Councillor Margaret Smith to submit a replacement as and when that is available. That takes us to recommendation 4, which is that Councillor Sue Jones joins the Standards Committee. Again, do we have anybody against, or can we take that as agreed? I think we can take that as agreed. And finally, item 5 is that Councillor Wharton Hardman stands down from the Appeals Committee, and that Councillor Margaret Smith, Mrs. Margaret Smith, is invited to replace him with a Conservative nomination as and when that is available. And that concludes item 11 on the agenda. So if I could now move on to item 12, which is the calendar of meetings, and if I could call on Councillor Foster to propose that.
Thanks, Mr. Deputy Mayor. We try and get the calendar of meetings out as quickly as we can for the next municipal year, and it's presented here for members to approve. Thank you.
Is that seconded?
Seconded.
Thank you. We don't even know if there's going to be a football season in the future, so I'm sure that hasn't been taken into consideration. But do we have any comments from members of committee, from members of the council? If not, can we, well, there'll be no written representations from members of the public, so can we take that proposed calendar as agreed? Thank you. We'll take that as agreed. If we can then move on to item 13, which is the tint policy report. And I call upon the chair of the Licensing and Public Safety Committee, Councillor James Flannery, to move the recommendations.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. At a meeting of the Licensing and Public Safety Committee on Tuesday, 8th December 2020, the committee received a report which invited members to recommend the formal adoption of the new Hackney Carriage private hire tinted window policy amended proposal. The proposal is to agree a change in the level of tint allowed in vehicles of first licence from the current 70% amended to 50% with a simple revision of the policy wording to reflect this change. The amendment has no cost impact on the authority and only requires a small wording amendment. Members are now asked to formally adopt the change to the policy to reflect the new tint levels. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Is that seconded?
Seconded, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Would any members like to speak to this or ask any questions? I don't have anybody indicating. There have been no written representations from the public. So is anybody against? In which case, can we take that as agreed and then move on to item 14, which is the modified vehicles policy, and if Councillor Flannery could return to move this as well.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Once again, at the meeting of the Licence and Public Health Safety Committee on the 8th of December 2020, the committee received a report which invited members to recommend and formally adopt the changes to the modified vehicle policy. Just on this one, the proposal changes to the current policy would only require vehicles that have been altered since first manufacture to be tested when first licensed and not upon each renewal as currently stated in the policy. So the proposed new wording can be found in section 21 of the report, and members are now asked to formally adopt the changes to the policy to reflect the modified vehicles policy. Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder?
Yes, seconded, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Are there any questions or does anybody wish to speak to the report? I can't see anybody indicating. There have been no written representations from the public. So unless anybody is against, can we take that as agreed? Nobody's indicating that they are against, so that is agreed. And that takes us on to item 15, which is the National Register of Hackney and Private Hire Licences. If I could call on, it's a bit more like a bus than a Hackney carriage, this, because they all arrive at once. If I could call on the chair of the Licensing and Public Safety Committee to move the recommendations.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Okay, at the meeting of the Licensing and Public Safety Committee on the 8th of December 2020, the committee received a report which invited members to recommend the formal adoption of the new proposed National Register of Hackney and Private Hire Licences to the South Ribble Borough Council Taxi Licensing Policy. Just on this one, it's a requirement of the NAFTA to adopt the use of this register in the taxi licensing policy of each individual authority which chooses to use the register. The proposal is to update the taxi licensing policy to include the NR3 checks as a mandatory requirement. Therefore, members are now asked to formally adopt the changes to the policy to reflect the National Register of Hackney and Private Licences to the South Ribble Borough Council Taxi Licensing Policy. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder?
Yes, seconded, Mr. Deputy Mayor. A long time coming. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any comments or questions from members of council? Again, I can't see anybody indicating. There have been no written representations from the public. So in the event that nobody is against, can we take this as agreed? Is there anybody against? No, in which case that's agreed. And that takes us to item 16, which is the notice of motion. And if I can call upon Councillor Matthew Tomlinson to move the motion as put.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Mayor. I don't intend to read out the notice of motion. All members have had the chance to read it. Instead, I'll just address some comments in support. I think it's entirely appropriate that I've had the chance to propose this notice of motion in the week when official figures confirmed that UK deaths from coronavirus reached the rather terrifying figure of 100,000. That is a truly staggering figure, Mr Deputy Mayor, which really needs putting into some context. It's 30 twin towers. It's more than the entire capacity of Wembley Stadium, and it's almost the equivalent of the entire population of South Ribble being wiped off the map. When the numbers are so large, it would be too easy to lose sight of the fact that these are 100,000 individual people. Mothers and fathers, sons and daughters, brothers and sisters, each one gone too soon, each one mourned by a family bereaved too early. One of these premature deaths was that of a Leyland man, Christopher Cooper, one of our residents, a healthy 63-year-old father with no underlying conditions, who went into hospital on the 22nd of November last year and died just 2 weeks later. In the midst of a pandemic, confronted by such tragedy, it would be so easy for his family's reaction to be to lash out, to be angry, or to indulge in self-pity. But instead, to her great credit, his daughter, Rachel Lidgett, has decided to try and do something positive and is now campaigning for a National Day of Remembrance to be established on March the 23rd, the anniversary of the first national lockdown. Indeed, listening to the Prime Minister's remarks at a press conference yesterday, it now seems he is suggesting that there will at least be some consideration of how we might remember those who have died, and at the same time recognise the extraordinary efforts of all those key workers who battled valiantly in the struggle to save lives and keep our country going. I'd suggest that here, Rachel has been ahead of the Prime Minister in recognising the absolute need to remember, to commemorate and to pay tribute. A major part of Rachel's campaign is an online petition which has now received over 6,500 signatures, and members who have the notice of motion will also have the link to take them to that petition should they wish to sign it. With this notice of motion, I'm asking councillors to approve our council using its communication outlets to further publicise this campaign, whether it's via our very active social media channels or by our more traditional contacts with local media outlets. I believe we're well placed to ensure that Rachel's campaign and petition gets as much publicity as it can, and I believe we should. Finally, I'd like to commend Rachel on the positive way she's approached this tragedy and wish her well with her campaign. I hope all of the councillors will join me in doing so. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Can I call on Councillor Jackie Alty to second the motion?
Thank you. Rachel is a member of Farrington East Ward, and I'm proud to be able to second this motion. I could speak of how, when working as a midwife, I was privileged to share with parents during the passing of their child. I could speak of how, when working as a nurse, I was privileged to endure with families the passing of a loved one. I could speak of how, as a health visitor, I was privileged to provide support for those suffering from complicated and extended grief. And I could speak of how, having attended virtual funerals for family members, I know them to be inadequate in both the journey and the resolution of grief. Death is, as ever, a part of life. But tonight, I call upon you to support a local resident, Rachel, as she negotiates both personal grief and an engagement with democracy. In supporting this motion, you are supporting the right of a South Ribble resident to engage with the democratic process. You are promoting discussion around the possibility for a National Day of Recognition, acknowledging the date when the United Kingdom took decisive action against a collective threat. You are promoting that same date as a marker for those who have endured restricted mourning options. And you are providing access to promotional tools to extend the reach of Rachel, a South Ribble resident. The aim is to acknowledge and say thank you to all those who have positively contributed toward addressing this cruel and unusual circumstance, and to enable Rachel and her family to achieve the numbers necessary for a government response or consideration for debate in Parliament. I commend this motion to Council.
Thank you. Could I open it now to debate and call on Councillor Michael Green?
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Can I begin by adding my condolences to everyone who has died and who's been affected by this dreadful virus that we are facing. And as yesterday we reached the point where 100,000 people who had tested positive for COVID had subsequently died within 28 days of that positive test. And that is a truly shocking figure. And had we contemplated this 12 months ago, we would have been appalled, but it's sadly come to pass. So my condolences to everyone, be it nationally and, of course, the local victims within the South Ribble area. I myself sadly attended a funeral yesterday virtually for someone who had died from COVID. And you can see the effect that that has upon families up and down South Ribble and throughout the country and, of course, worldwide. I indicated to speak, Mr. Deputy Mayor, in support of this motion. I do commend everybody who has stepped forward over the last year to provide that assistance and support to our community in the very difficult times. And yes, I'm thinking about our council staff, members, elected members in all parties at South Ribble, who have done some tremendous work. But beyond that, volunteers throughout our community, some who have got lots of credit for it, others that have just not gone noticed whatsoever, but they've made a real difference, some in big ways, some in small ways, but a real difference to the community, and I commend each and every one of them. And I also commend some sections which are not automatically mentioned, so we absolutely rightly praise our NHS, we absolutely rightly praise social services, and lots of services of that nature, and that is right and proper that we do so. But in addition to that, we sometimes forget about employees. So the postman that delivers the parcels, the post that keeps connections up, the delivery men that delivers food from supermarkets, the delivery drivers from parcel companies, the businesses that have gone that extra mile to step up to the plate, to help the government and to help councils in their hour of need, to provide services and to tailor the services that they have to provide the valuable services and equipment that we have needed. So to each and every one of them, well done. Turning in particular to Mrs. Lidgett and their campaign, I would first of all give my sincere condolences to Rachel and her family on the sad loss of her father, Mr. Christopher Cooper, which must truly have been devastating. But I would concur with Councillor Tomlinson's words later. She's to be commended that on the back of that, she's made it her mission to campaign for this National Day of Remembrance. And that is something which I think we should do. We should mark this nationally as a country. And I give my all-hearted support to that. So well done to Mrs. Lidgett, and I trust that all colleagues will support this motion this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I call on Councillor Turner?
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Whilst our heartfelt condolences go out to both Rachel Lidgett and her family, along with those who have suffered loss from this dreadful pandemic, we do find ourselves having the difficulty in supporting the motion, no matter how well intentioned it is. Mr. Deputy Mayor, we fully support the proposal for not just a day of remembrance for all those who have lost their lives to COVID, but also for a day of recognition of all of the health service staff and key frontline public service workers who continue to give everything to care for those affected. And the 23rd of March is the most appropriate as the first anniversary of the lockdown. We hope that through the mayoralty, whatever the outcome of this debate, we can facilitate such a memorial and recognition event in South Ribble. That this week we have now surpassed as a country the awful figure of 100,000 deaths brings it sharply into focus. Very sadly, we still also have the COVID idiots who refuse to comply with guidance, flout the rules, persist with conspiracy theories and pseudoscience, refuse the vaccination and put more of us at risk. It really does make you despair. However, that brings us to the motion. We have to question whether our communication outlets is the appropriate place to promote individual campaigns and petitions. And if this one, what next? There is also the issue of the petition, including calling for a public holiday, giving greater prominence to the victims of COVID over all other tragedies and loss, which, whilst not in the body of the motion, is contained within the petition we are being asked to promote. Unfortunately, therefore, Mr. Deputy Mayor, whilst we fully support an event on the 23rd of March, we cannot support the motion and will abstain. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I call on Councillor Adams?
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. I did prepare a speech tonight in support of this motion, but I think my colleagues from across the room and hearing them speak and kind of gathering my thoughts, hearing about them, I'm not quite sure I'm ready to do that. What I can say is the past 12 months has been some of the, excuse me, some of the most difficult for my colleagues and I. Behind the 100,000 people, there is a story. And my colleagues on the front line are part of that story. All I would say is that we deserve better. We deserve better from the government. We deserve more help. We deserve more resources. And we deserve to be treated better. The public deserve that as well. So I'm quite happy to support this motion. I apologise for the emotion, but we rarely get time to reflect. As once we finish work, we rarely have the time to reflect because we're usually required to come straight back in, to do the work, to be a part of someone else's story. Somebody's story who we will go absolutely to the wit's end to help a positive outcome for that story. I'm proud to do the job I do and to be around the colleagues that I am. They really are the best thing about this country. And the NHS is the best thing about this country. I'm proud to support this motion and I thank you to my colleagues.
Thank you, Councillor Adams. I don't think there's anybody in this chamber that would not absolutely take their hats off to the work that you do. And I think that the sentiments that were expressed about those who are making your job even more harder with the nonsense that's spouted on social media and elsewhere cannot be in any way helping the incredibly difficult job that you do. Could I counsel on Councillor Martin? So call on Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. First of all, I'm going to say I'm going to support this motion. If there's further work to be done, then it can be done later, I feel. As you're all aware, I do work for County Council. While we were off, one of my volunteer roles I took was to contact care homes through the initial stages of the outbreak. It is saddening that we see a figure that, I mean, if 240 aeroplanes came out of the sky and everyone was killed, there'd be absolute uproar. And it seems a poor show that there isn't from our leadership in this country of the same magnitude as it would be of that. During the time of calling care homes, it started off reasonably well. We worked well with it. Then the numbers started coming in. 3, 5, 7 places locked down. Staff are off sick. Staff have died. Residents are dying. Care homes were devastated. They were let down. And we noted all that, and we went forward with it, and there's been a positive outcome with the work that we did, where ministers were forced into doing some action. So I do support this, and I'd just like to say that I wish my friend and ex-manager Mark Singleton, who is currently on a ventilator fighting for his life, so I hope he survives, and I hope I don't have to remember his life.
Thank you. Councillor Margaret Smith.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Mayor. I think as a council and the members of the council, we are all incredibly sad about the events of the last 12 months. The figure that we passed yesterday, I think, is something that shocked us all to the absolute core. When Matthew talks about it's almost the whole population of South Liverpool, it really does bring it home to you. The devastation that this COVID virus has actually wreaked on this country and on towns and villages and families devastated by losses of, as been said, members of their family. We will support this because we think it is important that when we do get to the end of this, and God willing we will remember people and take cognizance of the fact that we should all remember that people are individuals. It's not one mass of people, it's individuals. There was something on television the other night where there was just candles lit all the way. A huge stream of them. It was unbelievable. It just brings it home to you. It's so devastatingly sad. And also for people who have abided by the rules, they have tried their best to help, but there are people out there who just don't seem to care. And it makes you really wonder, how can they not? When they're putting other people's lives at risk, when they go to parties, and it doesn't seem to bother them, I don't know, it just amazes me. So yes, we will be supporting it, and I hope it is successful. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Titherington.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I think the first thing is that thanks must go to Councillor Tomlinson and to Councillor Alty for bringing this motion to Council and allowing us to debate it. Also, our resident, Rachel Lidgetts, needs to be commended on her contribution to the campaign to have March the 23rd designated as a day of remembrance for all those who have tragically lost their lives throughout this terrible pandemic. And in so doing, I think we also need to recognise the thousands of extraordinary key workers who have put their own lives at risk to ensure that those in need are cared for. Deputy Mayor, I think we've all seen the reports on the television, social media and the press of the tremendous pressure health and care workers are under and having to endure during long hours, every day to battle and provide the care for an overwhelming number of patients requiring urgent and critical attention. To see the families overcome with grief as their loved ones are taken from them too early must be often in the most horrific of circumstances, is absolutely heartbreaking. Behind those care staff is an army of workers providing essential support to our communities. Council workers, shop workers, transport workers, fire and police personnel, as well as community groups and individuals, all doing their bit to keep us going through the most difficult of times. But just to witness it is absolutely emotionally draining, and the effects on those who are actually doing it are unimaginable. And I think that we could all hear within the emotion in the voice of Councillor Adams, who is on the front line, when he was talking to this motion. So it gives us an idea of just the pressure that those workers are under. That's why I think that we have to recognise the heroism displayed throughout this time, and we must not forget those who have succumbed to the virus and left us, as I say, before their time. That's why a day of remembrance and recognition is not only fitting, but it's appropriate, and it is the least that we can do. But it should not be a token gesture, but it rather should be a beacon for our regard for the extraordinary people who have answered the call for service with commitment and devotion, and to show the families and loved ones of those who have lost their lives that they were not merely a statistic, but flesh and blood and valued human beings. And that's why we must do this, and that's why I support it, lest we forget. I support the motion. Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Thirlbourne.
4 very quick points. First of all, can we all give our condolences to every single family that's been affected by this virus. 100,000 people is an appalling number, and every time somebody says it to me, it reminds me of my first visit to Bergen-Belsen, when you walk round the corner and you enter the gates and the first grave you see is 15,000 souls. So I think that's also fitting on this Holocaust Memorial Day. My second point is to Councillor Adams. I notice a look in your eye, Councillor Adams. A look that I've had personally, and a look that my colleagues have had in a former life. I'm actually extending a hand to Councillor Adams to come and talk to me. I can see that look, that distant stare. So please come and talk to me and see if we can sit down virtually wherever and talk through things and help to give you some support. Secondly, I think we've all said this to every single one out there. There's thousands and thousands and thousands of people we need to say thank you to. We could name them and we'd be here all night, but I'm just going to say one big thank you to every single key worker, delivery driver, postman, everybody else, somebody who's just delivered a box of food or made a phone call. Thank you. And the reason why it doesn't seem like we 100,000 people is so shocking, and all of a sudden it's there, is because we don't see this. It's not a Gulf War. It's the nature of the virus, and it's where it's fought. It's not fought in the streets or on the beaches. It's fought in closed wards, and it's fought behind masks. So we don't see it. That's why. So to everybody, follow the rules. And to the deniers, you're absolutely silly. That's all I can say. So that's all I've got to say, Deputy Mayor, so thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Walton Hardman.
Thank you. Councillor Adams' comments really rung home. I've been really privileged to work as a volunteer ambulance crew because of my previous employment, and I've seen some horrific things, not just from the actual physical impact of COVID on somebody, but the mental health implications this has had on single people, on families and young people. I went to a horrific incident over Christmas involving a young person who tried to take their life, and that was basically because of the COVID impact that had on him personally and his family. So it's terrible to see the impact this is having. I really want to take this opportunity to say this horrible pandemic has really brought out the best and strength of communities. It's traumatic. It's traumatic what people are seeing on the front lines, but this has really shown how communities can come together and collective effort put together to make the best possible of this sad situation. Finally, I want to end on a positive. So as part of my job, I visit vaccination sites, and today I spoke to an 85-year-old lady on a vaccination site who just had her vaccine, and her comments to me really ring home. She said to me, "I felt as though I'd entered the next phase of my life," and that really rang home today. That we are fighting this vaccine, we are fighting this virus with the vaccine, and we are hopefully moving into the next stage of our life. So yeah, I will be supporting this motion wholeheartedly today.
Okay, thank you. I don't have anybody else who's indicated to speak, so could I therefore invite Councillor Tomlinson to summate?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Not a lot for me to add. We've heard some very heartfelt contributions, particularly from, if you'll forgive me for embarrassing him, from Councillor Adams, somebody who really does have experience of working on the front line. And clearly it's going to be Council's will that we support Rachel in her campaign, which is why I brought the notice of motion. So thank all the members for their supportive comments, and I look forward to us voting this through and then getting in touch with Rachel to talk about how we can support her further. Thanks.
Thank you. I don't think there's any doubt that everybody in the council chamber is seriously moved by the effects that COVID have had. Nobody spoke against this motion, so I'm just going to take that it's carried, and the motion, the proposal in the motion will then be taken forward. All right, that's carried. That then takes us on to item 18, questions to members of the Cabinet. Oh, sorry, item 17 is questions to the Leader of the Council. Are there any questions for the Leader of the Council from any member? Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Would the Leader of the Council, would the Leader consult with the Borough Council's external appointment to the County Council's Health Scrutiny Committee to seek his views on whether effective scrutiny is taking place, and as to whether it is considered appropriate that services run by a Conservative government should have a Conservative chair of scrutiny along with a Conservative vice chair? Could he also ascertain whether this is a common practice at the Conservative controlled County Council, as surely all of the scrutiny chairs and vice chairs cannot be Conservative, can they? Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. If the Leader would like to respond.
Thanks for the question, Councillor Turner. And what I would say is there's some very unusual things going on at County Hall. I think we all agree with that. And clearly the scrutiny committee being chaired and vice chaired by the same party that's in power is highly unusual. It is not always normally an opposition party that scrutinises the council, the work of the council, as it is here in South Ribble, and probably every other district and unitary authority in Lancashire. What I would say, it's even more pertinent, your question, given the fact that we've heard today that the government are proposing to withdraw 33% of the vaccines to Lancashire and the North West in the coming days to send them down south. And so I will be pleading with our representative on the Health Scrutiny Committee at County Hall and the leader of the County Council and the chair of the Scrutiny Committee and the vice chair of the Scrutiny Committee to put every ounce of opposition into that decision. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions to the leader from members of council? I can't see anybody indicate. Oh, Councillor Wharton-Hardman.
Thank you. It's really commendable that as an authority we currently have an employee volunteer policy, allowing our council staff to have 3 days per year to volunteer in the community and support where it's really needed. Would the leader take away from tonight's meeting and look at potentially increasing that to 5 days for this year, so our staff can go and support vaccination sites and to assist with the COVID operation across the local area?
Thank you, Councillor Wharton-Hardman. I will most certainly speak to the Chief Executive about that. You're right, we do have the volunteering policy, but I can assure you, Paul, that we have officers all over the place at the moment doing all sorts of voluntary work in the community, but I will most certainly speak to the Chief Executive and I'll ask the team to give you a call about this with an update.
Thank you.
Any other questions to the leader from members of council? In which case, we do have a written question from a member of the public who I hope, given the content of it, is really impressed with the way that I've come on as a substitute tonight off the bench. And it's been circulated, so I will ask the leader if he can answer it.
Just out of interest, could the officers read the question? Because I'm aware there's a number of members of the public, Mr Deputy Mayor, who may be listening in, have not had sight of the question.
Okay, thank you. For obvious reasons, it is common and good practice to award the chair of scrutiny to a member of the opposition. You seem to have gone against that good practice and awarded that position to your subs-bench leader, Councillor Howarth. It may be okay for the Lib Dem councillors and their leader to sell their souls for speech marks, mess of green bins, speech marks, etc. But this is not good for the ratepayers who expect the opposition to be scrutiniser of your business. My question is as follows. Will you replace the head of scrutiny with a true member of the opposition?
There is a member of the opposition, currently chair of the scrutiny committee. I think the scrutiny committee and the governance committee of this council do a wonderful job. I think Mr Derbyshire, who everyone in the council is aware is a Conservative supporter, Conservative campaigner, perhaps could ask more appropriate questions. We're in the midst of a pandemic, and if he is really that concerned about scrutiny, perhaps he can write to County Councillor Driver. And in answer to the question, no.
Thank you. That then takes us on to item 18, which is questions to members of the Cabinet, and I will take these in order. Do we have any questions from members for the Cabinet Member for Health and Wellbeing, Councillor Titherington? Nobody is indicating, in which case I will move on to questions to the Cabinet Member Finance, Property and Assets, Councillor Matthew Tomlinson. And I have a question, first of all, from Councillor Hancock.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Mayor. As it is now common knowledge that Priory Academy has chosen to terminate the joint use agreement with the council over the leisure centre, Could he please advise on how the multi-use games area is now going to become the property of the school? I asked this question when Penwortham Leisure Centre was threatened with closure in 2007. The Mugger was built at a cost in the region of £55,000, with a further £30,000 spent on floodlights, whilst £108,000 of the capital works carried out at the time came from Section 106 monies taken mainly from my Broadoak ward, along with Leyland Road and Woodlands Grove in Penwortham. The £30,000 squandered on the rarely, if ever, used floodlights came from a politically driven raid on the reserves of the town council. Could we please have an explanation as to how a facility paid for by Penwortham Council taxpayers, Penwortham Town Council, and by using Penwortham Section 106 monies to bail it out, can now become the property of the school? Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Councillor Tomlinson.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for the question. Members who've been around for a while will know that this facility has a complicated backstory. I recall the previous leader of the council, Councillor Mrs Smith, investing an awful lot of her own personal time to try and maintain this as a facility in the area. But now the school have taken the decision to cease the joint use agreement, which is going to cause an awful lot of complications. I hope, Councillor Hancock, you'll forgive me. Potentially it's such a complicated question and response, and without real time to consider it, I'd be welcome to maybe talking to the Chair of Scrutiny about doing a piece of work around this, both to help us recognise how we got to where we are and what potential future for this facility looks like.
Thank you for that, Councillor Tomlinson.
Okay, thank you. I have a question from Councillor Ogilvie.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Yes, it's just a query regarding the recent information we got on the Wharton Hall project management consultant. Can I thank the Cabinet member for the detailed information pack that we got alongside the delegated decision. Just a couple of quick queries on that. I noticed that Purcell, the architects who were involved in the early stages, appear to be no longer involved. I wonder if there's any particular rationale behind that. And in relation to the chosen project management consultant, the information mentions that they have lots of local experience. I wonder, and I'm not necessarily looking for an answer immediately tonight, but I wonder if you could give us 3 examples of similar value contracts that that particular company has undertaken. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the question. As regards Purcell's, we did have some, I think I can say in a public arena, we did have some concerns about the projected costs of retaining them. The quotes that they were coming back with certainly had 1 or 2 of us running for cover, and that's why we decided to see if there was anyone local who had experience. The company we've decided to go with do indeed have experience, and they've worked with colleagues in Chorley. I'm not in a position to give you 3 examples of work that they've done at this stage, but I can certainly ask officers to pursue that for you.
Okay, thanks very much.
Okay. Do we have any other questions to Councillor Tomlinson from members of the council? I don't know if you want to ask yourself something, Matthew, but you've still got your hand up. No, right. In which, if we don't have any other questions, We do have a written question from a member of the public, and I'll ask the monitoring officer to read that one out as well.
Thank you, Mayor. This statement was read out not by Margaret Thatcher, but by Sir Keir Starmer, commenting on the government's awarding of contracts, and I quote, "This is not the Prime Minister's money, it's taxpayers' money. The Prime Minister may well not know the value of the pound in his pocket, but the people who send us here do, and they expect us to spend it wisely." Councillor Tomlinson, when I send my rates money to SRBC, I expect it, as Sir Keir Starmer stated, to be spent wisely, and the process of that spend to be fully visible to the ratepayer. I consider the awarding of contracts behind closed doors to be an affront to the ratepayer. It may be considered magnanimous of you to award contracts to a local business, but I consider that it does not satisfy the economic necessities of good, transparent business practice. Another issue that may arise is the problem of perceived corruption. I am not accusing you of corruption, but this method of awarding building contracts leaves you open to accusations that you may be. My questions are as follows. Will you cancel the awarded contract and put out the scheme to tender? If you won't cancel the project, will you publish the ratepayers its cost? And I understand this is also connected to the Worden scheme.
Thank you. That was a question from Mr. Derbyshire. Councillor Tomlinson has already answered a similar question from Mr. Derbyshire at scrutiny. So is there anything you would like to add to enhance your answer?
Oh, there is, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Clearly, as has now been explained, Mr. Derbyshire's concerns relate to the appointment of a QS for the Werden Hall project. I guess the short answer to Mr. Derbyshire's questions are no and yes. In the rather long preamble to his questions, Mr. Derbyshire seeks to draw a comparison with how we are conducting business with how the government has handed out billions of pounds of taxpayers' money to friends of the Conservative Party. So firstly, I'd like to say what we haven't done. We haven't given a £15 million contract to a ferry company with no ships. We haven't given a contract to one of our party political donors who owns a company with no assets and no track record of delivery. We haven't given a multi-million pound PPE contract to a company with no history of supplying PPE, seemingly simply because the owner is a neighbour of a cabinet member. Nor have we appointed someone to deliver a world-beating service at a cost of billions who clearly has no relevant experience but is married to a Tory MP. What we have done is to seek to appoint a local company with a proven track record of doing this kind of work with other local authorities. The suggested fee has been benchmarked against similar fees charged by companies for similar work and found to be entirely appropriate. I'm confident that this arrangement is compliant with the Council's constitution, represents good value for money for the council taxpayers of South Ribble, and satisfies our ambitions to spend South Ribble money in South Ribble wherever we can. So no, I will not withdraw the decision. On the second question, I hope that everyone here will appreciate that I have a track record on calling for transparency wherever possible. And I hope that that track record of calling for transparency has been backed up by action. At the moment that we speak, for reasons of commercial confidentiality, I can't reveal the exact fee tonight. But as soon as the contract has been fully signed off and gone through the council's decision-making process, it will become a matter of public record. And then Mr. Derbyshire can be given the information he's asked for, as indeed can any resident of South Ribble. So to sum up, no, I won't consider the decision itself. And yes, Mr. Derbyshire, you and anyone else who seeks to look for it will be able to see the fees that this company charged. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. That then takes us on to questions to the Cabinet Member, Communities, Social Justice and Wealth Building, Councillor Aniela Bilinski-Gelder. Do we have any questions from members of the Council? Again, I don't see anybody indicating, but we do have another question from a member of the public, Mr. Derbyshire, which I will ask the officer to read out.
I live in Penwitham and I am a little confused where I address my council issues. Do I contact Penwitham Hub, Penwitham Town Council, South Ribble Council, Lancashire County Council or my MP? At least I lost my MP. I am a true believer in devolved democracy, but even I believe this level of representation is going too far. My questions are as follows. Do you agree with me that this multiple level of democracy is taking things too far? If not, will you provide a detailed list of which committee, etc. I contact if I wish to solve a problem I consider is a council issue, i.e. who cuts the grass, etc.
Sorry, I think I said that without turning the microphone on. Councillor Bilinski-Gelder.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr Derbyshire, for your question. First of all, I'd like to say that I love questions like this, so thanks again. Philosophical questions such as how much democracy is too much and what is the role of the state are among my favourite questions. For example, should people be encouraged to represent themselves, and how much representation is too much? Mr Derbyshire has asked me this question actually at a previous cabinet meeting, and I suggested then, as I will again, so the answer is the same, that it is difficult, in my opinion, to have too much democracy. I'd like to share actually one of my favourite quotes. So long as democracy, in most people's minds, consists in going periodically to the voting booth, we have to admit that this leaves little on the flesh and the skeleton of democracy. Voting alone does little to motivate interest in participating or to suggest that one might make a difference. Having the opportunity to go to the voting booth is, of course, better than not, but the democratic revolution that began more than 200 years ago in the political arena needs to catch up to ordinary people's desire and expending expectation that they will have some say, some voice in everyday workplace decisions which affects their lives. So that's the end of the quote. For example, there's very little democratic accountability within the economic or financial sector, and many could argue for more accountability in other spheres, such as healthcare and utilities. However, I feel from the premise of your question that you're probably more interested in the operational elements and perhaps more the bureaucratic aspects in relation to the structures and layers of democracy in South Ribble and Lancashire. So starting from the top, Lancashire is a first tier authority and South Ribble the second tier, along with other areas such as Preston and West Lancs. Lancashire is responsible for education and schools, libraries, roads, parking, travel, social services, waste disposal and management, births, deaths and marriage, as well as trading standards. Anyone who has access to the internet may find this list themselves on the homepage of Lancashire County Council's web pages. Interestingly, the Conservative leader of Lancashire County Council wrote to the government in July last year outlining plans to replace South Ribble with a single unitary, which would include Preston, South Ribble, Chorley and West Lancs. The local resident would need to be, in my opinion, local residents would need to be heavily involved in any decision making which would see South Ribble become part of a single unitary. The Labour group are absolutely clear with our preference to retain the two-tier system with the district council, enabling more power to our residents. South Ribble is the second tier of the two tiers, as I mentioned earlier, and South Ribble sits next to LCC and is responsible for recovering the council tax, environmental health, including pest control and monitoring the cleanliness of restaurants, kitchens, so food standards, planning, building control, maintaining roadways, including cutting grass, street sweeping and maintaining litter bins. And although South Ribble isn't responsible for the disposal of the waste, it is responsible for collecting it. Mr Derbyshire also mentioned the community hubs, previously the neighbourhood forums in his question. So I'd like to add, these hubs offer an opportunity for residents to share their views on what they would like to see in their local area proactively. The meetings are usually held every 6 months in each area, but I wouldn't consider them overburdensome for the residents. The hubs are an essential mechanism for ensuring the council listens to the community. In terms of the cost, the same councillors are represented on these hubs as sit in the council chamber, so there is no duplication in terms of allowances. And finally, Mr Derbyshire's question in relation to the value of Penwitham Town Council. South Ribble has a few parish councils. Town councils and parish councils are autonomous organisations established by residents through democratic referendum. So the areas of South Ribble have in fact voted in favour of more democratic accountability. I'm also aware of new areas wishing to set up and establish parish councils. So I have a feeling the residents of South Ribble are in favour of more democracy, not less. Many of these structures I've mentioned are well established and have been around for over 5 years in many cases, representing different communities at different levels. By all accounts, residents appear to want more democratic accountability, wanting their voices to be heard on climate change, the budget and planning decisions. Residents may attend any committee meetings they wish to, in my knowledge. In answer to your question regarding who's responsible for cutting your grass, Mr Derbyshire, South Ribble is responsible for grass cutting, and furthermore I would advise Mr Derbyshire and all South Ribble residents to contact our award-winning South Ribble Gateway, the call centre, with any questions in relation to services provided by all local government in South Ribble. Our friendly staff are always happy to answer questions and signpost any queries to the correct place. We now have the Department for Work and Pensions, Citizens Advice Bureau and the Gateway all in the same building to support our residents through the new one front door approach. This is something I will personally be championing over the next few months. In summary, the levels of democracy in South Ribble have evolved over time and currently suit the residents. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how much I enjoy philosophising about democracy. I'm here to represent my residents, not myself. So finally, South Ribble Gateway is open 5 days a week and available to answer any questions from any residents about the services South Ribble provides, and signpost residents to Lancashire County Council, the Citizens Advice Bureau, the Department for Work and Pensions or any other organisation if necessary. I hope this very quick summary has been useful for all residents, and I hope the pandemic has proven that borough councils are at the heart of local democracy, serving our local communities. Thank you.
Thank you for that brief and succinct answer, Councillor Bilinski-Gelder. Could I move on to questions to the Cabinet Member Planning, Business Support and Regeneration, Councillor Bill Evans? We do have a question from Councillor Ogilvie.
Thank you, Mr. Somebody's not muted, I don't think.
Sorry, that's me. My apologies.
I forgive you. Yes, it's really a follow-up to a question that I raised at the last council meeting regarding the full costs associated with the Chain House Lane development decision. The outcome from the last council meeting was that the Cabinet member would give a response to the resident. I was asking the question on behalf of that resident. A response was sent to the resident. Unfortunately, there was a link included in that email which would have given the resident a lot of information that he was unable to open because it was effectively an internal link that wasn't available to members of the public. He did email the Cabinet member at the end of last week, still asking for some further information, and I checked with the resident today whether he had received any further response. He said that he hadn't. So I'm just asking if the Cabinet member could re-establish contact with that resident and bring his query to a conclusion. Thank you.
Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Mayor. Councillor Ogilvie, I didn't receive an email last week. The last time I received an email off your resident was December. And what happened, I contacted the offices and the offices contacted him directly with fresh links. And we haven't heard anything from him since. It was Catherine Lewis that was dealing with it. So if you, tomorrow I'll ask Mrs Lewis to get back in touch with him and supply him with fresh links, if that's okay. Thanks, Mr Deputy Mayor.
Do you wish to come back on that, Councillor Ogilvie? Yes.
Yes, thank you for that. Yes, just on the basis that I spoke to the resident today and he's still looking for some information. I think there may be some confusion as to what he's actually asking for relative to what he's actually been given. So yes, if that could be established as quickly as possible and bring the question to a timely conclusion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Could I call on Councillor Barry Yates?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Good evening, Councillor Evans. Do you think it is appropriate for any councillor on South Ribble that threatens a licence of premises with closure because they've been refused admission to that premises, should be promoted to chairman of the planning committee? Or
sorry, Councillor Yates, that is an inappropriate question, and I'm not taking tit for tat or further tit for tat activity from you in view of what happened earlier. So do we have any other questions for Councillor Bill Evans from members of the council? Right, nobody's indicated. On this occasion, we don't have any questions from members of the public. Item 19 and 20 on the agenda have been withdrawn because, if members recall, we amended the constitution to remove those. That takes us on to item 21. It's always unfortunate, but because of the nature of the next item of business, we do need to exclude the press and public, which means that we need to terminate or end the YouTube live stream that's currently taking place. So we'll just take a few minutes to do that. Well, sorry, first of all, could I have a proposer to exclude press and public, please? Councillor Foster is indicating. Do we have a seconder?
Second.
Thank you. Well, is anybody against that? In which case I'll take that as agreed to exclude press and public. And now we will take a short period to end the live stream. Thank you to everybody who has watched this evening and those who've taken part. So whose hands up? Sorry, Councillor Smith, I can't see a hand up, but I'm told you have one. So if you would like to come in.
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Mayor. Yes, my hand has been up for some while, to be quite honest, and I would like to propose that we don't exclude the press and public. I think it's something that should be in the public domain, and I don't see any reason why the press and public, I don't think there's anything in the report that should be confidential, and therefore I would like to suggest that the press and public be allowed to stay in the meeting. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, in which case I now need to move to the vote. And we're going to have to go through the whole roll call here. Right, okay, we're going to have to go through the whole roll call. So can you please mute your microphones until such time as your name is called, and then say if you are for or against excluding the press and public.
Mr. Deputy.
Right, I've been asked to bring in the monitoring officer.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. The advice from myself is that this is a confidential report. I have reviewed it, and my colleague has reviewed it, and it does contain confidential information, particularly about the approach the council have with their dealings with Serco. So it is a confidential report. I understand Councillor Smith's feelings on the matter, but that doesn't change the fact that it is confidential.
Councillor Smith, are you prepared to accept the officer's advice?
Yes, whilst I don't agree. Whilst I don't agree with that, I am prepared to accept the Vice Chair, Deputy Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. That's much appreciated. In which case, do we have any objections to the exclusion of the press and public? And if we don't, I will take that as agreed. And now we will take a short period to end the live stream on YouTube.